So my name is Sean Peoples, and I'm a multimedia producer and program associate at the Woodrow Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. And Broken Landscape is a film that is based off of some partnerships we have with a group called Circle of Blue that do a lot of amazing reporting on water issues around the world. And so there was a original reporting trip done by Keith Schneider, a former New York Times reporter, on the connections between energy demand, food security, and environment and water. How those three issues are connecting in ways that A, we really should pay attention to, and B, we kind of want to know what's happening to our food supplies while there's an energy demand, and what are the consequences of those things kind of happening in tandem. And one of the byproducts of that energy demand is impacts on the environment, really, really negative impacts on the environment. So one of the things we wanted to do with Broken Landscape is take some of that original reporting and really try to tell a story that was bite-sized, that was short, that could fit a 10-minute, 15-minute documentary, but that also explored all those connected issues in a way that really did uncover that they do have connections, that they are linked, and that in this northeast portion of India, they're playing out every day.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure.
So how did you attempt to strike a balance when you were telling both sides of this mining story? Because obviously you had video from both the people downstream and then also the people that their livelihoods were mining. So how did you try to strike that balance?
Sure. So as a filmmaker, as someone who's trying to tell a story, I think one of the first things you want to do is make sure you're authentic to what you think is happening. You have a lot of control, I think, as a storyteller to show what sides of the story there are. For us, we really wanted to show that this was a complex story. It wasn't just about winners and losers. It was about some of the people who are caught in between that mix as well. We have mine owners whose interest is very much rooted in extracting as much coal as possible and selling that coal and getting it to market and making money and expanding that base of operation. We had the miners themselves who are kind of caught between wanting to make a living but also wanting to stay alive. These are very treacherous conditions, and unfortunately in this area of India there are 12, 13-year-old boys who are doing this labor, or there are migrant laborers, people from Bangladesh, people from Nepal. So in this area you've got people who are doing the actual mining that are taking their lives in their hands each time they go into a mine. And then downstream from where this mining is happening, once you pull that coal out of the ground, you really are flirting with disaster in terms of environmental impacts. And one of the big environmental impacts of extracting coal and having it near a water source is acid mine drainage, is acidification of water. You've got water that starts to become completely disrupted in terms of its pH, which then ultimately will impact a community if communities make a living off their water, get their food from their water, or use it to drink. So those communities who are caught in the middle of a river that is dying, where there are no more fish, where it's dangerous to even use the water on your skin, let alone ingest it, those communities are losing out. And so we really wanted to show all sides of the story and not make up our minds in the film as much as we wanted to communicate that this is what you see is what is happening. And I think we wanted to leave a lot of that to the audience. And just one more plug, you see journalists who are trying to tell the story. This is a complex story. We wanted to show that they're on the front lines of trying to make sense of all this, make sense of both the connections between those three issues we mentioned and also make sense of the lives at stake, the environment, which is badly in need of some paying attention to in these areas. So trying as much as possible to do justice to those characters while also telling this compelling story is tough, but it's one of the things that we had as a real big goal for the piece.
Yes,
Sorry, I talked a lot.
That's fine. This is great. So you did manage to stay really objective throughout the film, which was, I mean, extremely impressive considering what was at stake for all of the different people that were involved. So in your opinion, whose responsibility is it to try and mitigate these negative effects, both environmentally and also as far as providing people with livelihoods? Do you think that should fall to the government, or should that maybe global aid organizations or private firms get involved as well?
That's a good question. I think as filmmakers, we really want to bring up a lot of the questions. Obviously, I have opinions, and I think one of the things that you start to see, and this might not right off the bat answer your question, but I think for us, for me at least, it's a moment of clarity. Nishant is a miner who we feature in the film. He is from Nepal, and him and his Nepali friends who are mining are immediately affected when the ban on coal is implemented. They don't have any work, and they're not going to get paid. But at the same time, he's the one person on camera that had said, and we included it in the film, he says, I know this is bad for the environment, but we need to regulate it. There needs to be some sort of regulation here. And I think he's making sense when he says that. There is not enough local enforcement of regulation that could mitigate a 12-year-old, 13-year-old miners going into those mines. B, figuring out a way that if you're going to have migrant laborers, figuring out are they being treated fairly? What is their compensation if they are wronged by mine owners who really don't care about them as people? They just care about them as coal extractors. So I think really the piece also looks at, there was a ban on coal. There's an impasse here. There's an acknowledgement by the Indian government. Up until about a year or two ago, the Indian government, the Supreme Court, was the one to kind of be the arbiter for these kinds of environmental concerns, these environmental issues. What brought about this coal ban was a student group on behalf of the downstream villages who were being affected basically said this has got to stop. And so a new judicial body called the National Green Tribunal, this is one of their first big decisions to ban coal mining. It used to be Supreme Court, now it's this other judicial body mainly dealing with environmental issues, NGT we call it. They banned coal mining 2 days before we got to Northeast India, and so completely changed the story for us. Following that story was really hard because so many people said, this NGT, this is new. I don't even know if the mine owners or the coal miners are even going to listen to what this new judicial body is going to say. And it was that people did listen, and people really legitimized the fact that the ban was in place by not coal mining, by not doing the extraction. So I think the first part of your question, who needs to step in? I think it has to be an Indian government issue. But if you zero in, it really does pose difficulties when you talk about enforcement, when you talk about who owns the mines. There are also people who are politicians. So that localized government needs to have accountability. And it's confusing, it's difficult, but it has to start with some sort of regulation. And unfortunately, I think this ban was the start of maybe what we'll see coming out of this is a better, safer, and more highly regulated coal industry in that area, but it's yet to be seen that that's happening. So that's a long answer to your question, but it's a complicated issue. I don't think it necessarily is going to be about people from the outside coming in and helping that. I think as storytellers, we can help shed a light on that and maybe pressure things to happen, but I think it needs to be an organic process there in Northeast India.
Awesome. So my final question is just what implications do you think that your film has for future dialogue about human and environment interaction? I know you spoke a little bit before we started filming about your experience in Ohio and how those people had such a similar experience. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think for us, for me at the Wilson Center, and for my collaborator at Think Out Loud Productions, who helped create this film and some of the other films we do, it's about connecting issues that sometimes aren't connected in film or stories that we see. And it's about pushing policy discussions, starting conversations that haven't been started yet, but being able to kind of start from a place where we have a story as a way to kind of conceptualize what the issues are. I think there's something to be said for policy papers, and there's something to be said for presentations around policy implications, but I think at the end of the day, communicating why these issues are important, why human interactions with environment, why talking about livelihoods in context of how to move forward and not extract from the environment to gain that livelihood in areas like this, having stories around that can really open up new audiences, discussions that haven't happened before. And then through that, you have discussions about people saying, well, that is not so far from what I know in my area that has done coal mining for years. In Appalachia, screened it for folks in Athens, Ohio, and they said, we know this story. This is not new to us. Moneyed interests who really have power and wield that power in the coal mining industry, and that economy is built on coal mining, so people need to be a part of that, but at the same time it creates all these complications because they know, the people in Ohio know what this is doing to the environment. So I hope that these can spark discussions not only just about the microcosm, that story that we have right there, but look at how it connects to our daily lives domestically, or about issues that are local. So opening up that dialogue is really important. I think you need to do that through story. You can't just do that through policy recommendations on a paper. You kind of have to tell stories sometimes and really get people involved in characters and compelling characters.
Awesome. Well, I guess I'll hand it over to Leah.
Okay, we're gonna shift a little bit to the health side of things now.
Okay.
So we know that this method of coal mining impacts the environment largely, and you talk about the acidification of the water sources near it. So just to get started, just for some reference, can you just talk about what some of the health effects the populations downstream from the industry might see, just for some background?
Sure. I mean, first and foremost, those rivers are used for water supplies. So drinking water and for sanitary purposes. And so immediately, once you start to have a river that begins to transition to a dying river, to becoming a pretty balanced pH to what essentially is vinegar, or maybe right before vinegar, you're going to have a need for people to go out beyond their community to get that water that they need. As we know, water is an everyday need. It's an everyday thing that we need to drink water. And beyond that, you start to understand, well, this water cannot support life if it's dying. What does that mean? You've got fish who no longer inhabit that, and that is a primary protein for people who are living, and who are living a subsistence lifestyle. So they've got their own plots of land for crops, but they also are around a body of water. So traditionally, they have used that body of water to fish, to eat that fish, to thrive off of that resource. And so once it's dead and you have no more fish, you have no more living thing, you're really compromising your ability to live a healthy life. Something that has evolved over time, that is very much organic, both around drinking water and around using that for your food source, now it becomes threatened. Where does that substitute come from? Where is that that's food security 101? You're looking right now at a supply that has gone dead, and that's going to impact health no matter what.
Okay, and going off of that, actually, obviously in the movie you talked about, well, it was presented that these people recognize that there's a health impact from this water now, and they purposely avoid it. And usually water is the primary reason for people living where they live. So I was just wondering, you may not know the answer to this question, if you knew if there were any other sources of water where they live, and if, like, you know, I mean, that really impacts your lifestyle if you have to travel an hour each way to get water every day versus living right next to a source.
Absolutely. So that specific river is impacting that community that we highlighted in the film. And there are other river systems in that area that are not as affected, not as impacted by the coal mining. That just happens to be the one that's most affected. So, but you're absolutely right. That changes the nature of how you spend your day. You are diverting what you might do. Let's say you're trying to earn an income by, I don't know what you would be doing, but if part of your day is spent trying to make a living on the thing that you do for your livelihood, but now all of a sudden you're going 2 hours, 3 hours away just to get your drinking water, just to get the things that you used to have very much close to you, that's immediately going to change the nature of your relationship with not only your livelihood, but your community. And you start to think, why am I still here? I mean, why am I not migrating to where it's going to be safe and I'm not going to have to worry about this stuff? Those are the everyday decisions that really get a kind of wrench thrown into the gears in terms of making calculations for your everyday livelihood. And those are big things. I think people here domestically don't necessarily think about that stuff every day. It's something you think about in maybe a longer term, but this is the kind of thing for a community like that. It's every day for them. It's every single day. They're looking at the nature of the food supply, the nature of the water supply, and having to make a calculation. And it's scary. It's really scary.
I know you mentioned that you guys sometimes look at access to health and public health projects and stuff like that. So I was just wondering if you knew that if these populations, what their level of access was to help them with these problems, or, you know, if there's any like NGOs nearby that are willing to implement public health projects to help them get cleaner access to water.
That's a good question, and unfortunately, we did not spend a lot of time reporting that out. I think it's something, though, that the fact that you're asking that question, I think, is really important, because you start to look at these issues and look, at the impacts beyond just your daily food supply, your daily water supply, and you start to realize no matter what, your health is going to be at risk. And what's the closest place to help you manage those situations? Let's say you are drinking that water anyway, or you don't know you're drinking contaminated water, and you start to. That's a really huge problem for people in a region like that, where access isn't just your friendly clinic around the corner. It's a long way away for some folks. The downstream river community we were in, it's on the border of Bangladesh, and it was a 3-hour trip up the mountain just to get to that community, and a 3-hour trip back, and there was no clinic there. They're really dependent on their own knowledge. It's not like that stuff is really readily available. But yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the specifics of the real health access there, unfortunately.
Okay, I mean, you brought up before that people living along the rivers traditionally fished for food or even for livelihood. And I was just wondering if you noticed, well, first part of the question, if you noticed that these people, after the coal mining started and the acidification of the water already took place and their livelihoods were cut off, did you find these people were now miners in the mines, or did they find some other way, or were they now dependent on the industry that had ruined their livelihood initially?
I think this particular community was definitely, they had not succumbed to that relationship. They were very much staunchly against the coal mining industry, the coal mining interests. That said, a much larger proportion of people in that region are now completely dependent on the coal economy. It is an area that 20, 30 years ago was primarily an agricultural center. Again, subsistence livelihoods, your own plots, but you were selling your surplus that your family wasn't going to eat on the market. For your family, that was the way you made a living. In the last 20 years, coal has completely transformed that area, and now the entire economy is really based around extraction. Not everyone has to be a miner in the coal mines to be a part of that economy. There are all these other kind of ways in which you get sucked in to really becoming dependent on that. And that was really apparent when on the first day of shooting, there was a coal mining ban protest. So people were protesting the idea of this ban. And there was 20,000 people that showed up. That was a large statement. I didn't see any of the people that were in this downstream village at that protest. They were really upset that there was a ban. The majority of people in that region were really upset that there was a ban because that was their livelihood.
Obviously, we just went over how the process has a negative impact for the environment and the health of people downstream, but you mentioned before how dangerous it was to actually be a miner, and since it's so unregulated, there are no precautions put into place. So could you just go over maybe the health risks and the dangers of actually being a miner in the...
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. So I think some people might be familiar with fracking and how that really does a number geologically on the stability of soil, the increase in kind of earthquakes in the area. That people understand that. It's a little bit of apples and oranges, but for coal mining in this area, they have a practice called rat hole mining, which is basically digging a hole vertically until you hit coal veins, and you start to dig horizontally into the coal to extract the coal. Now, that's really dangerous in itself because you're kind of burrowing, and over top of you is just layers and layers of soil. So again, 12-year-old, 13-year-old boys go in there and do it because they're small enough to get into these holes to extract the coal. And immigrants from Nepal, Bangladesh, Burma, they're also the ones because they really need the money and this is work. So they're taking their lives in their own hands every time they step into one of these mines. A year before we got there, 15 miners died because of the collapse of the soil over top of them. And I imagine all the stories that we don't hear are really scary too. The equipment they use is so antiquated. It's money first, coal first, get it out, try to get it as much as you can out of that mine. Miners put on their back about 50 pounds of coal, and they go up a rickety staircase. I don't know if you guys remember, but there's a spiral staircase made out of wood that goes down each mine, and I would be so scared to strap on a 50-pound bag of coal walking up what are really dangerous steps. That's that's the least dangerous of a very dangerous practice. So the health impacts, I mean, for me, it's life and death down there. You're breathing in that kind of coal dust. I mean, that cannot be good for you, especially when you don't have the masks or the equipment. These guys don't have any kind of armor at all, or any kind of preventative kind of measure for when things do go wrong and something like detach or rock falls. I mean, these guys have boots that are rubber and a headlamp, and they have pickaxes. That's it. So you're already going into a really scary situation, and on top of that, you don't have the proper equipment. So a lot of health concerns for the miners themselves.
That's all I have to do.
No, that was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure thing.